How to help a pathological liar or a person who just lies too much. That's the topic of today's video. I'm Jürgen Rasmussen, by the way. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. So from time to time, I have clients whose lies have caught up with them. And the consequences of those lies are bad enough that they are willing to make some changes in their life in an effort to become more honest. I have two clients in that predicament at the moment, and I've seen a few clients in the past as well. So, what am I doing to help these guys, and how have I helped other people in the same boat, so to speak, in the past? So, first of all, it's a really positive thing when someone can be honest about their dishonesty, when they actually reach a point where they can admit to themselves that they are being deceptive, that they are being honest, and where they can feel the consequences of that in their own body. That's the first step. So, honesty about dishonesty is great. Some of the most dangerous people, are people who will claim to never lie, or that they have no biases, that they're always fair-minded and objective and that sort of stuff. These folks are probably lying or lack self-insight or both. I'm reminded of the famed defense attorney, Jerry Spence, who was famous for going so many years without losing a case, as well as his books. And I remember more than a couple of decades ago, he was interviewed because a client of his had been found not guilty. The client was a black man who had been charged with raping and murdering a white woman in the Deep South. Now, when the jury was being selected, Spence did something that was very counterintuitive to most people. He would only accept people in the jury who admitted to having some racist tendencies. Of course, he didn't accept Ku Klux Klan members or Nazis, but people who admitted to having some racist tendencies. And some commentators would speculate that, Jerry Spence has lost his touch. What is he doing? Is he trying to get his own client convicted? But he won the case. Of course, I can't claim with certainty that there's a correlation between that decision and the outcome, but he was asked about it in an interview, and he said, look, everyone has some racist tendencies. People, again, who completely deny it are either probably lying or they lack self-insight or both. And that's when you get the most irrational decisions. The people who are honest enough to admit to it are perhaps more likely to be willing to give the client or the accused a fair shake. So the first thing I do with these clients, oh, by the way, this is interesting. Both of the guys I'm presently working with, when I first asked them when they came in, like, why are you here? What's going on for you that you'd like to change? And what would you like to get out of us working together? They could not give me a straight answer. They would just ramble, go off on tangents, get lost in, just a bunch of words and never offer a direct answer. I expected that, by the way. This is typical. So from time to time, I would reel them back in and say, look, are you noticing you're not, I'm asking you a really straightforward question. You're not at all answering it. What are you doing here? What would you like to get out of these sessions? And they would, do it again. Now, this is quite typical, by the way, because most people are not comfortable directly lying. So a lot of people who have this problem, I'm not saying that this is true for everyone, but I would claim that it's true more often than not. A lot of people who have this issue have a tendency to not engage in straight talk. They don't give direct answers. They change the topic in subtle ways, they distract, they end up in long stories. And I think the reason for this is that most people have an issue with directly lying. They'd rather avoid it. So if you ask them a question that they're not comfortable, where the truth is not comfortable for them, they might, get angry at you for asking the question, or try to convince you that they're a good person, or in subtle ways change the topic, or repeat the question back, like anything but actually answering the question. Now, of course, there are people who are completely comfortable with lying to your face, especially people who might have some solid psychopathic tendencies and who lack a remorse or who lack a conscience. You have other people, many activists and people who are very identified with certain ideologies, especially victim ideologies, that feel justified in lying because the ends justify the means. And you're a person of the outgroup and you don't really deserve honesty. So there are exceptions to this. Something else that they also did, both of them, is that they would talk about themselves, but and these are both Norwegian clients. So they wouldn't say I. They would say he or you or one can think or a person. Again, this isn't a something that's always accurate, but when people are uncomfortable about lying, they might want to psychologically distance and use more impersonal language, right? So the first thing I did was I just drilled down on them and got them back and insisted that they answer. And I also had them own their own statements. I would only permit them to talk in I terms. And this is uncomfortable because once you own something, it's way more likely that you emotionally or at a felt sense level get more engaged with what you're talking about. So I know I make a lot of videos where I talk about disidentifying from thoughts and we are not our thoughts, but this is an example of a context where it might be useful to deliberately get someone to identify with their thoughts and to make I statements and to own them, essentially create a sense of self out of them. So something else I did once they were able to do these things was to ask them for their definition of honesty and lying and what, if anything, they deemed as an acceptable lie. And this is an important thing because a lot of the time, for these guys, you could say that the habit of lying had them. They were just kind of acting it out. What I was asking them to do was to have a conscious relationship to topics such as truth, lies. So for example, someone telling you something that's false is not necessarily a lie. It might just be evidence that they're telling you something which isn't true. But if the person believes wholeheartedly in what they're saying, you could call it misinformation or just flawed information. But it's not a lie. For something to be a lie, you have to know that what you're telling is not the truth. Say it anyways in a context where honesty is expected. So obviously not a magic show. So interestingly enough, both of these guys would initially say that, oh, lying is never acceptable, or you should always tell the truth. But that, in my mind, is a kind of unrealistic, unnuanced perspective. So I said to them, well, what about the Anne Frank example? Let's say that it's the Second World War. You have hidden Anne Frank in your basement, and Nazi soldiers come knocking at your door and ask if you've seen her or know where she is. Would you tell the truth in such a situation? Or what about a robbery situation? Someone's trying to rob you and they're asking you about your PIN code or other information. Or are you at any obligation to offer honest information in a context where someone's trying to rob you? So as I said to them, I said, look, for me personally, I think honesty only really applies under relationships which are consensual. Outside of that, I don't think you have any obligation to be honest whatsoever. So this gave both of them some pause for thought to look at this, right? Here's an interesting thing that I've noticed just throughout my life, and that is that, of course, everyone lies, right? But people vary wildly in terms of how much they lie. I mean, you have quite a few people who lie very seldomly, and then you have people who are, let's say, pathological liars. They just, lie as they breathe. They have no commitment to truth whatsoever. And then you have people who engage in so-called white lies, which are still lies. But you can lie by omission, by not telling certain things, meaning you can say things that are truthful, but omit so much information that it gives a very misrepresentative image of what was going on, and that would still be a lie, right? So the lie isn't just necessarily what you do, it's also what you're not doing or not saying in a particular context. But the point I was attempting to make is that I know people who are very honest in some ways, meaning if you shake their hand and they say to do something, you can be sure that, barring a heart attack, they're going to do it, or if they promise something, they're going to do it. They're going to tell the truth no matter what. But some of these people too have a lot of self-deception going on, meaning that they're so committed to never lying or always telling the truth that they might refuse to even look at information that might challenge anything they believe in. And in such a way, they can devise a life for themselves that constantly reinforces their own beliefs, their own model of the world, and never really be put in a position where they have to challenge anything. So this might be the medical doctor, for example, who's honest in one sense, but they never look at critical books or findings about their own profession. They don't investigate. They're not curious. They make sure to never get exposed to information that could put them in a rough spot, right? So how honest is that too? For example, if you work as a medical doctor, you could be very honest and simultaneously quite dishonest. What I'm having both of these people do too is to every day write about an event where they have lied, to write down, what happened, and to then look at, as honestly as they can, what was my intention in lying. Might be one intention, might be several, but what was my intention in lying? Was it to get unearned social status? Was it to impress someone? Was it to get some sort of advantage? Was it to avoid punishment or being embarrassed? Was it to spare someone else's feelings? Was it to avoid conflict? Like, what was the positive intent behind the lie? And to then look at, what was the actual consequence of the lie, as far as I can see, both for myself, but also for the other people involved and even the relationship. So that ability to do this was my intention or set of intentions, and these were the consequences, and to really look at that, not just short term, but long term. And to then go back to the drawing board and ask the question, well, how important is it really for me to spare that person's feelings, or have that unearned social status, or like, what do I think I'm going to get out of that? And did I actually get it? Did it give me peace of mind, or happiness, or whatever I was looking for? And to then also look at, what are other ways I could have perhaps achieved what I wanted to, but remained honest at the same time. Generating a couple of options and then planning a particular response for next time and then executing. And if they find themselves lying, their task is to do the exact same thing. All of this is meant to have a more conscious relationship to lying and truth. People lie when the truth appears to be problematic for them. So as and it makes sense to people to lie based upon the thinking that looks real to them in the moment. And as long as that thinking keeps looking real to them, they are going to keep lying. So this is a way to kind of update their thinking and update their map. There's a saying in the coaching world that sometimes weaknesses are strengths that are overdone. I'm working with another fellow at the moment who has issues in his marriage. And one of his tendencies is to always attempt to avoid conflict. He's very diplomatic. He's very good at it. He may have been brought up in a home where that ability to avoid conflict at all times was a good strategy to get along, or to avoid pissing his father off, or whatever might have been the case. But the thing is, as I said, sometimes weaknesses are strengths that are overdone. What he hadn't quite seen was that if you always try to avoid conflict, you create conflict. Because what would happen was that his wife, and this had happened in previous relationships too, would begin to notice that, hey, wait a minute, this guy's just speculating in terms of what he thinks I want to hear, and then he tells me that. Can I trust him? What does he really mean? Does he have a backbone? Can he stand up for himself? Where's his manhood, so to speak? So this is also a form of lying. Now, of course, both diplomacy and being blunt and direct, has its advantages. But it's a matter of dose and context. So anyways, I hope these reflections were useful to you. Know that I see clients from all over the world online. It's mostly the Western world, to be honest. So if you're looking to make some sort of change in your life and you're wondering whether you and I could be a good fit, I invite you to shoot me an email through provocativehypnosis.com. I also mentor people. I mentor psychologists, hypnotherapists, NLP folks. So if you're looking for mentoring, again, get in touch. We can have a conversation. Also, if you're watching this in 2025, know that starting in June, 4 weeks in a row, once a week, I'm having an online training on how to integrate meditation and mindfulness practices in your client work. Most people learn about meditation and mindfulness in a kind of spiritual context, but most of your clients will have no interest in that, and most of them will never become meditators. But you might still be able to help them have insights and develop skills that are relevant for them in their particular contexts. It's going to be talking about troubleshooting, social psychology, the effect of suggestion, in addition to meditation. So if you're curious about that, check out the seminar page at provocativehypnosis.com. And as always, thanks for listening.